And what I wanted to do is just talk a little bit about, for this session, performance management in the new world of work. And for those of you who don't know me, I've been doing this, I've been in this space for a long time. Um, my first book, How Performance Management is Killing Performance and What to Do About It, was published in 2016. But we started working on that book, in early 2013, 2014. It was delayed in its publishment. And so I've been mucking around, and boy, it has been a journey. And what I wanted to do this morning is just share a little bit more about what that journey's been like, sort of where we are today, and where I think things are headed as we go forward. Good morning. It's still early here, and I'm only halfway through my first cup of coffee, so I hope everybody bears with me. It's morning here. I'm in the Pacific Coast. Good afternoon to those joining us from Europe. Good evening, I guess, for anyone who's joining from Asia Pac. I wasn't able to listen to the whole presentation because that would have had me up way too early this morning, but I'm really excited to continue the conversation that you guys have been having about performance management. So we're going to talk about the state of things to say, hey, what is happening out there today, 2022 and 2022 in the world of work for performance management? Let's take a moment and go back to some of the foundational pieces. If any of you have seen me present before, some of this will look like a little bit of a review, but maybe new to many of you. I'm going to talk about some of the evolved thinking. So over this past decade, then what have we learned? What has changed in the way that we want to approach this? And then a few critical success comments. Like if you're going to go forward with really reimagining performance management, as I would say, rebooting it, what are some of the key things that are going to be crucial for success? And I'll tell you, this has been lessons in the field, painful lessons in the field. So I want to be sharing some of that with you today. So let's start with just talking about the state of things. My headline is, well, it's messy. It's messy out there. If you've, back in 2015, 2016, Josh Bersin said, hey, these are the days that everyone's going to reboot performance management. And yet, despite all that energy, despite all the conversations, despite the work that we've done for this past decade, this is still frankly true for most people, is that most organizations, not only the employees in the organization, but the leaders and the HR leaders still really aren't very pleased with what's happening in the space of performance management. So I've been tracking data in this space for a long time, and pre-COVID, this was what we were seeing, is that we still had about 72% of organizations were saying that they needed a reboot, that they still hadn't really modernized performance management in the way that they thought that it would really deliver on their expectations and the needs of their people. Gartner has been doing similar data, and more recently they're showing that 82% of leaders worldwide still aren't seeing that these methods are achieving what they want, and 62% say it's not keeping pace with business. So why, if we were going to reboot and reimagine all of this stuff back in 2015, 2016, are we still here with a process that most people universally dislike and that still is not accomplishing the objectives? I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But here's what I know, because I have been tracking this data. What is holding people back? What is causing this inertia from us to do something that really is achieving those types of results that we were just talking about in that last session, where we're seeing people driving engagement, driving organizational performance, those types of things? Well, the first one that's dogging people, and this has to do with that question that was posed at the very end, is rewards without ratings. If you're truly going to modernize performance management, you are going to step away from ratings. I fundamentally believe this, even after a decade of doing this work. So how then do we recognize reward and pay people if we don't have this numerical number that we're putting into our system and it's cranking out the answers that we need from a pay, bonus, compensation perspective? I'm going to touch on that today in this presentation. We're going to go deep in that in my masterclass later this morning. The second thing that's holding people back is manager trust. The idea that if we sort of release a little bit of the control and policing of this process, can we trust our managers to really implement this process in a way that is is intended and will have the types of results that we need. So we need to loosen control, but do we trust the managers to sort of pick up the ball and take it forward? And a couple of years ago, I was just thinking about this, Mihai, when I was in Brussels at HR Congress in 2018. Last time I know that I was physically with you all, I talked about the manager dilemma. We did a presentation there that talked about the problem we have is that we've elevated a lot of managers who are really good at their particular discipline and maybe not necessarily good in the people space of being able to take processes that may have a little more nuance, like a conversation-based performance management process, and take it forward. So that's definitely a key piece. And then we still are struggling with some executives to really let go of sort of the old ways that they've managed performance and move into something new. They're still, honestly, I think for a lot of leaders, the old processes worked for them, got them into leadership. They're less likely, less comfortable letting go of that with something new. So those are the three things that we continue to see holding organizations back from moving forward. So what am I seeing out there? To me, it's just this interesting tug of war that's happening in organizations. And I see this all the time, of this debate between pay for performance and equitable rewards and ratings or no ratings. What do goals or priorities or OKRs look like? How rich are they? How simple are they? Are they cascaded? Are they not? So there's this huge debate that is happening. And that debate is sort of what creates that inertia. We don't tend to take a bold stance. We tend to often end up in the middle, or we sort of compromise on a lot of things, or we don't do anything. So this is what I see happening out there, unfortunately, in way too many organizations. And the other phenomena that this creates, this sort of waiting, is that we see organizations going through a redesign multiple times. I can tell you I have more than 10 clients probably in the past 3 years that I've gotten involved in. It's their third round, their second round. They're coming at it again because of all those compromises, because they didn't boldly go forward. Um, you know, we don't see we don't see the changes that we really want to see. So that's a bit about what I see out there. Now there is some some good news. If there's any kind of silver lining to the pandemic, I guess, the pandemic sort of shined a big old spotlight on this and said, look, traditional performance management isn't working. We already knew that, but now it's like right in the center of the spotlight. It's not working. And it wasn't accomplishing the things we need to really connect people, to help them when we were physically disconnected, to have a process that works when I can't lay eyes on you every day. The refocus, or the elevation of the focus on equity and inclusion, has also started to kick up more dust in this space. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Our reward strategies weren't matching the times. And yes, we're going to talk more about that, particularly this up in the next session. So I've seen the pandemic actually free some HR leaders from that debate and allow them to move forward, which has been great. If you are still having some of these debates in your organization, hopefully some of what's been happening in the world will allow you to really move forward. So that's kind of where we are in the state of things. So I want to take a minute. Like I said, I'm hoping some of you have seen my stuff, read my stuff, heard me speak before. As I said, I've been out there for a decade doing this work. But if not, let's just take a moment and just kind of reground on a few of the foundations related to performance management and the reboot process. The good news is, as I said, that my first book was published in 2016, and it is the detailed methodology for how you reboot performance management. I want to share that with the world, and it's based on some really foundational points of view and perspectives and frameworks, if you will, and those have held for the past decade. They have proven to be true. I can't tell you how many skeptics I've had to deal with, and they've helped. So I can proudly say you can trust these as your foundational process. The first one is the idea of the 3 common goals. So way back when we first started doing this work, we wanted it clear about what is it that we're trying to accomplish with performance management. 95% of the organizations globally had a traditional performance management process when we started doing this work. What was it that they were trying to accomplish with that process? We're trying to develop people. How do we grow our future leaders? How do we to grow the skills and capabilities that we need? We're trying to reward equitably, not equally, but equitably. Are we paying people fairly and equitably for the works and the contribution and the role that they have within our organization. And lastly, a little bit the new kid on the block is we're trying to drive organization performance. How are we aligning to the right work and moving forward in the way that we want? These remain to be the three common goals of performance management. I say now every organization will have different weighting, different priority on these goals based on where you are, what agenda you've got, based on the maturity of your organization. But these three goals will always be present. Now, I always joke that my grandma Edna would say, well, bless its heart, because traditional performance management really failed and continues to fail on most of these goals, which is why when you go back and look at that data from Gartner, we're still seeing leaders and employees and everyone frustrated that this process isn't delivering on the expectations. Now, way back when we started this, the reason I got into this writing game, I wasn't an author prior to this, was I'd been asked to write a white paper for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation on this process. And they were asking us specifically to answer the question of how is performance management driving performance? Well, interestingly, what we found was that there really wasn't any evidence that it was. And in fact, what we were finding is more often than not, traditional performance management was driving disengagement. And what we all know as HR and people leaders is disengagement reduces performance. It doesn't elevate performance. So we really had a problem with this, with our traditional approach to performance management, despite all of our best intentions and best effort. Now, this is what I call the first of the fatal flaws. I saw Mihai just posted the link to the 8. I'm not going to go through all of them today, but here are the 8 fatal flaws of performance management. They, as I said, they have held of what are the things that are holding us back, that this is, that if we go through an annual review process where we're rating and assessing people, that doesn't create conversation or trust or connection between leaders. We are, as we say in our feedback book, we are positively negative. We don't remember the good work, and that brings this very negative negative conversation into our process. The ratings, we can talk more about that in our conversation afterwards, but we are not machines. We cannot numerically rate on a 5-point, a 7-point scale people with fairness and equity. It's just not possible. We think we can, but we can't. We have this problem where we focus way too much on the individual and we lose the team in it. We need to focus on teams and organizations and not purely on the individual. So these are all core issues, fatal flaws, and I apologize if you're hearing the dogs, that have held. Similarly, then we have the 8 fundamental shifts that talk about what are the things that we knew we need to be doing to go forward. What are the shifts that are going to take us forward? It's about giving employees more agency in this process. It's about shifting our focus from looking back to looking forward. It's about shifting from a pure performance process to a more growth process. We're going to talk about that. It's about bringing more voices in to create equity and fairness and, frankly, insight and value in what people are sharing with us. It's about stepping away from uniformity. This is a huge one that I'm dealing with a lot of organizations on. One size does not fit all. We need to create processes that have more flexibility, more optionality, that can flex to the huge range and diversity of roles and work and things that are all happening within the organization. Okay, the third framework that is super important is what we call the 6 configuration categories. So on the front of my book, you'll see there's this big knot. And part of the problem with performance management is we tended to address it as it's just one thing. But it's not one thing. It's 6 things as we've pulled it apart. It's how do we set goals? How do we align? It's feedback and performance insights. How do I know how I'm doing? How am I growing? What do you see me doing that are my strengths that I should take forward? It's how do I grow my career here? And how do I have experiences that help me grow my career here? And how do I get the coaching and the mentoring I need that helps me achieve my potential in the direction I want? How do I make the right talent decisions? This is not just pay and pay and rewards, but this is also about promotion and experiences and leadership and all those types of things that we're making when we're looking at talent decisions. And then of course rewards and recognition. So how am I ensuring that I am rewarding equitably, that I am giving people the recognition they deserve for the contribution and the impact that they have? So these are all things that sit within this complexity of performance management. So we can't address them as a big ball. We have to start to pull them apart. And when we're doing the design work, thinking about, well, how do we address each one of these in a way that accomplishes those three common goals with the right priorities that meet our organization and delivers on the culture and the experience and all those things that we want for our people. So that's the complexity of performance management, and those are some of the key foundations that continue to hold, and that if you're doing this work, I hope you consider. Now, I always say there's not one right answer, because every organization is different. And I will tell you, it's funny because when I do this work, people say, well, just give me the answer. And no, there's no cookie cutter here. Every single organization needs to look different because the organizations are different. We're all our own snowflakes. Are there things that are good practices, are leading practices that I continue to see working? Yes. And so here I'm sharing a few of those types of things, looking across the 6 configuration categories. I in the goals and alignment space, seeing things moving more towards team goals and stronger strategic alignment, moving more towards priorities, or I know our Better Works friends are talking about their OKRs, the different methods that we might do this, but how do we keep those fresh, alive, more progress oriented, rather than setting a big annual goal and going to the end of the year and going, why was that goal there? And then trying to assess that goal. Feedback and performance insights. This is the space that is so important, because if you did only one thing well, do this well. And we talk more about that in the feedback book. But how do we have conversations that are about our employees, that are about their growth, that are about their career, that are about their potential? And how do we have that in a lighter, more frequent way, but also that brings more voices again into that process, where feedback is redefined as insights that helps all of us grow and go forward. Career and development planning, really giving a lot more tools and insights to our people so they can move forward and take ownership of their career, putting more mechanisms in place that allow for more mobility of talent. I think of it like a velocity of talent. Are you putting things in place that are going to help your talent move more effectively throughout the organization? Are we really, this gets back to the coaching piece, are we really preparing managers and others for coaching people? How do they have those conversations? How do they help people grow? How do they create something that is a positive experience that keeps people engaged and excited about the work that they're doing? And that can pull in a lot more peer-based models and other things that we're using today. Talent decisions, we really like to step away from calibrations and move into what we call about talent talks. How do you start to have more conversations about your people that are creating decisions and outcomes that are actionable, that are collaborative and actionable amongst the peer group of managers, and they're taking those forward, and people are nothing about me without me, that people are part of that process. And then rewards and recognition. Again, going to talk a lot more about this later, but this idea of pay for capabilities and reward for contribution, really reimagining rewards, and that has to be a key piece of this. And recognition, if there's, so I said feedback, if you're going to do one thing, do that. The other thing that comes with that, because recognition is a type of feedback, is really amping up recognition within the organization. Sadly, when you look at the statistics, there's a huge number of people that say, I do not feel seen within my organization. People need to be seen. They need to know that we love them, and we're thankful that they've shown up every day to do the work that they do. So those are some of the common foundations. Those foundations have held. That's some of the solutions and the designs we're seeing. But now the other thing I'd like to talk about is, how is this thinking evolving, and what are the things that I've learned as we've gone through this? And so here we go. It's going to talk about greater focus is needed on fairness and equity, on the role of teams, and on growth. So these are my 3 big learnings over the past 10 years. And, we all learn, hopefully, continue, and how feedback is a part of that. So fairness is vital. We were talking about trust earlier. You have to have trust, and you can't have trust if you don't have fairness. And so it's very important that when we think about our performance management process, we really need to take a step back and understand it from a fairness perspective. We've been doing a lot more work looking at this and understanding in traditional performance management, we frankly have a problem where we bake in a lot of bias throughout the process. And I don't have time to go through this in detail, but we talk about things like um, expectation setting. Well, all goals are not created equal. If the thing you're basing your performance on is purely someone's goals, then that's about how they set the goals. That's probably not about how they delivered the goals. So there's a lot of bias that starts from that very get-go and then flows throughout. We see a lot of feedback processes that are still anonymous, or where the manager is triangulating the feedback that other people are sharing. That's not helpful and creates this element of distrust. Calibrations, why do we like to step away from those and move to talent talks? Because calibrations are rife with unchallenged assumptions and bias and agendas that come into those meetings. They often don't create the environment and the collaboration that you're really wanting to create. So we have to take a step back and really, if you're interested in this, go through your performance management process and start to think about where are those places that inequities or bias are able to kind of show up, and what can you do to start to minimize that in your process. The other thing is teams. I've got completely convinced that we need to really dial down the focus on individuals and way dial up the focus on teams, because we all work in teams. And what we know is high performing teams are what are really going to elevate the performance of the organization. So we need to be thinking about how teams play a role in performance management. How do we start to set more team-based goals where individuals can then set commitments to the team and have that more tighter connection with them? How do teams do feedback? Because we know that teams that share strength-based feedback six more times than those that don't way outperform the organization, or the teams that tend to be more negative or don't really share that kind of positive feedback. So we really need to turn up the volume on feedback and collaboration, and the way that we help each other, peer to peer, teammate to teammate. That can be such an essential part of our performance management process. And growth, we sometimes kind of let teams off the hook, but honestly, if we're trying to create experiences for our people, if they need skills or capabilities that they're trying to grow, where best to do that but in the teams themselves can craft those experiences. They can start to be more proactive in thinking about, how do I help this person have that type of experience so they can grow that skill? Or I see this potential in this person, I'm going to put them on that project so they get that opportunity to grow. So much of that can happen if we really focus that energy and sort of set those expectations at the team level. And then the last piece is growth, and this is probably my biggest aha. And as we, if there's a third book in me, it's probably going to talk a lot about this piece, is about shifting our focus from performance and balancing it out, or probably I would put growth a little more down, to be very honest, putting a lot more focus on growth. How do we help our people grow? Because here's the weird conundrum or irony in this. If we focus on growth, our people will perform. So maybe if we could quit policing and assessing and evaluating and start supporting and lifting and inspiring, we could actually have more fun and grow our people and have the performance of the organization increase as well. So here's a model that we're playing with. So rather than thinking about performance management as just performance, and I always say when I work with clients, let's rebrand it. Let's not call it performance management anymore. I also call it performance enablement. We hear that one, a performance enablement. A lot of different names that people are out there, but really there's a way to really reimagine this and put grow right in the center of it. So here's this model of grow and perform. And what you see is you see teams flowing around it, and you see feedback flowing around it. And so to me, this is the new model of performance management. If it puts the growth of our people, the growth of our teams front and center, if we get clear on what performance means, if we have simple priorities, if we have clear OKRs, if we have performance that is witnessable and manageable, and we focus more on progress and commitment to the team and how that progress is driving us towards our larger, big, hairy, audacious goals, that's where we start to really get in this groove that we can create amazing experiences that don't start to feel like performance management anymore, but start to feel about, how do we help this organization be the best it can possibly be? How do we help our people and our teams be the best they could be? How do they have more fun and achieve the potential that is inside of them? And to me, that's what this is about. And so I love this quote from Marshall Rosenberg that talks about how our tendency, and we all, particularly in Western cultures, grew up this way, is to overdo evaluation, which is this assessment and rating and all of that, and underdo observation. What do I see in you? How do I help you? How do I get things out of your way to help you grow? How do I help you by observing the strengths you have, the power you have, the things that you can take on that will take you to the next level? Okay, this is a quote from the feedback book, but one of the things that is imperative that we do if we're going to adopt this is really shift our mindset, particularly for those managers that we want to help be ready to coach and support, but really for all of us, is this idea that it's their future, it's our people's future, it's not our agenda. And if we lean into their future, that's going to drive our performance, that's going to drive our kinds of outcomes. So we need to increase fairness, we need to elevate teams, and we need to fuel growth. And again, the best way to do that is going to be through really great practices of feedback. This is thinking about fair, focused, and frequent feedback that is anchored in this new definition that we offer in our feedback book: clear and specific information that's sought with the sole intention of helping ourselves and others improve, grow, or advance. And if you can put feedback in the heart of all of that, you'll have amazing outcomes. I4CP and CEO did a killer study in late 2018 that looked at all the practices that people were doing in the performance management space. And their conclusion in the end was only one was driving notable impact and measurable 2 times the types of outcomes: revenue, performance, profit, when you had a growth-oriented feedback culture. So if you're going to do one thing, do that feedback piece and throw a bunch of recognition in there. So to bring this to a close, here's the crucial commitments that I think organizations need to make if you truly want to reboot, if you truly want to reimagine performance management. Number one is trust. So we're on the same page here. We need to trust our people. We need to trust the process. So often when we get in those debates and we're in that tug of war, it's because we don't trust that our people will do the right thing. We don't trust that they'll take the right actions. So that has to start with trust. And Laura, who co-wrote the feedback book with me, she'll say Paul Zach's her professor crush. He's written some amazing books on trust, and literally looks at the levels of impact we can have when we create organizations with high trust. The other commitment I ask of you is don't leave rewards out of this. I talked earlier about the 6 configuration categories that we need to address. A fatal flaw in design is if you try to take rewards out of this. I've seen it happen multiple times. Well, the performance management lives under the talent team, rewards lives over here, never the two shall meet. That is a problem. You have to come together. You have to keep rewards in the conversation, or you will not be successful. And we're going to talk later in the next session about getting real rewards and moving away from pay for performance, which I'll put in air quotes because I'll talk about why that is, and towards pay for capabilities and reward for contribution. And I don't have time, I don't think, to go into this, but we will be talking about this in the masterclass, the pay for capability, reward for contribution idea. And cruising here. And my slides don't want to advance. And then my last piece, and this was what I closed my first book with, and it's still so important, is be courageous. Again, I think so often we fail because we sort of compromise. We don't make the bold moves. We don't take the bull by the horns. I think I see here where we really make some bold decisions on how we do this process that puts our people at the heart of it, that trusts them, that supports and readies our managers for this role. We really need to be courageous as we go forward. So those are the 3 commitments I have for how we take this forward. Being courageous means that you need to be ready to defend against the naysayers. They're still out there. There's a lot of them. There's still stuff published that will tell you things that I don't necessarily think are true. But put all that aside, defend against the naysayers, and keep your courage as you go forward. And these are really then the proven paths to success. Anchor in those foundations, focus on fairness, growth, and teams with using feedback as that accelerator, and make that commitment to begin with trust, reboot rewards, and go with courage. So there you go.
Wow, thank you, Tamra. We had, again, lots of comments and questions going on. So we have time for
Great.
one or two questions. I should mention we've been at BetterWorks recommending and sharing your feedback book with a lot of clients and prospects, and it's been very popular. So yeah, really interesting.
Thank you, Amy.
Recommend everyone check that out today. So a couple questions before we get on to the panel. We have some great ones, so I want to make sure I get some of those asked. So there was a theme with a couple of questions about how you can give managers the tools during an evaluation, so that they're evaluating without bias and prejudice along the way. So how do you ensure that talent reviews are less biased? There were a couple of questions along that theme, if you could take that.
Well, there's only a few, there's sort of two sort of things that we can do to minimize bias. Number one is, and the most important, is to bring in more voices. So we can't rely purely on the manager, because that manager is always going to have just their point of view. And so sources, bringing in more sources, crowdsourcing those perspectives, and that ties with this idea of starting to get feedback flowing throughout the year, is a great way to start to minimize the bias. In the talent reviews, of course, we can bring some of those voices in from peer managers if they have experiences with those people. But then the other thing is to really be anchoring on things that are witnessable, right? How do we have observable definitions of what the skills or the capabilities that we need, or observable definitions of what impact is? And so we need to move towards those things that we can see versus those things we feel. Because when we're in the feel space, we're usually in a wrong space as far as we're introducing bias, positively or negatively, about those individuals. So part of that is you pull apart performance and growth. Performance can become very clear about frequent light priorities and progress that we can see and witness. And then growth becomes much more about conversations about careers. And so if we kind of pull those apart in the way that we're thinking about them, we start to have a lot more fairness in our processes.
Great, thank you. And we'll ask one more question before we move to the panel. It's actually a more of a comment, but I'd welcome your thoughts on it. So somebody has asked here, it would be good to hear more on the performance review and compensation review link in the absence of ratings. Without ratings, one challenge could be executing pay increases behind closed doors without the employee knowing their perceived contribution and value. So you might be recommending that they join your session later, but if you have comments on that, then I think that would be helpful. There was lots on that in the chat.
Yeah, well, number one, anytime you're behind closed doors, you're in trouble, right? So that's why I said earlier, nothing about me without me. People need to be part of the process. So yes, we'll talk later about pay for capability, reward for contribution. I didn't have time to go into that. But the way that gets clear is pay for capability becomes a skills-based model that is aligned to the market. And so that can be extremely transparent to employees. You can do pay banding based on roles and where a person is in their progression against that role, and what the skills and capabilities are against that role. That's when we get into a very fair and a much more effective base pay model. Then we need to define contribution within the organization and what that looks like. And that's a big part of what we're going to talk about.